Good morning. I'm very glad to be here, and I want first of all to thank the organization for inviting me to join you all today, and for the great work done behind the event. My contribution today is titled Revitalizing Historic Science to Envision Contemporary Industrial Landscapes, and more in general is a contribution about design approach regarding landscape architecture within a project for waste disposal areas, plants for energy production and industrial sites, matured over time, carrying out landscape impact assessment studies and the definition of mitigation measures related to landfills and system for energy production. The intention is to explore comprehensive practices in a work context in which many times functional needs prevails over other important issues. I briefly present myself. I'm an architect and a landscape architect with a background in Italy and in Spain. I got a PhD in landscape design at the University of Florence. Currently, I'm assistant professor at the Faculty of Environmental Design, University of Calgary in Canada. And before, I was adjunct professor at the University of Bologna within the School of Agriculture and Veterinary Medicine. There, I was also part of a research team, spatial engineer team within the Department of Agricultural Sciences for several years, focused on landscape, agricultural landscape and rural landscapes. I'm a professional in landscape architecture with emphasis on urban renewal, public space design, and landscape projects for industrial sites. This now informs teaching and research activities at the University of Calgary. I started creating a research team on urban infrastructures and industrial sites, both in urban, peri-urban context and rural landscapes. Today, infrastructure projects play a key role in determining virtuous or negative impacts of the urbanization process. Logistic, industrial and waste landscapes emerge as crucial places which are demanding an innovative design thinking with reference to the multiple interrelated aspects inherent to sustainability. I call industrial landscapes, energy infrastructure, etc., service sites. Given the relevant functions, service they perform for the society in transforming materials and energy. No doubt, industrial settlements are of utmost importance with regard to environmental policies. On the other hand, I say service landscapes because a project for waste management areas and plants and industrial landscape often lack a comprehensive concept and show a scarce design care about architectural quality and open space features. Landscape architecture is relatively often involved in reclamation of disused industrial sites when a change in land use is planned. Unfortunately, its role within design processes before and during the operational management of industrial functions is less established. In the international context, for a long time, specific regulations and guidelines have defined the need for landscape impact assessments, including visual perception aspects. The premise is that aesthetic quality is integral part of landscape quality, and scenic aspects are integral part of landscape identity. Assessment methods are based on investigations about the relationship between landscape and man components, such as land and water, vegetation, structure, and visual elements, such as color, form, line, texture, scale, spatial character, etc. Nevertheless, with very few exceptions, design solutions to mitigate negative visual impacts are often an afterthought. Usually, industrial settlements are shamefully naked, or vice versa, modestly hidden through visual barriers made up of evergreen edges, more or less effective. In the design processes for service sites, my idea is that other values can be added to those purely functional or strictly related to environmental safety, so that a multiplicity of communities' desires can be complied, including the one to enjoy a beautiful scenery. Interdisciplinary work is necessary in order to address cultural and perceptual values while designing facilities and carrying out studies regarding environmental safety and ecology. Through its peculiar familiarity with the design with nature and land art, landscape architecture can significantly contribute to combine preservation of environmental resources and promotion of aesthetic vision as fundamental components of well-being. In these pictures, we can admire the gentle, poetic, aesthetical result of an environmental action by Alan Sonfist. Quoting the artist, a sealed clay pool filled with virgin earth was placed on top of toxin soil in Houston, New York. The seeds were naturally blown in by the surrounding environment, and the pool developed into a small oasis of the natural habitat. Eventually, the park system used this method to cover the entire site. Through practice experience, I found that an exploration on the following simple but still not easy design criteria can be beneficial. Cross-scalar interpretation of landscape patterns related to ecological structures and historic settlements, scale balance with the surroundings defined mainly through well-known peculiar components of landscape architecture, such as landform modeling, planting design, and water draining systems. Dialogue between the exceptional industrial aesthetics and everyday rural landscapes. Within the study for mitigation measure related to a biogas plant within a piggery in the countryside of Ravenna in Italy, the analysis on the territorial context allowed to identify the essential connotation of the place, the peculiar geometries of the ancient agricultural settlements by the Roman civilization called Centuriatio, and the presence of cartyards, traditional cartyards, whose garden and crops, especially vineyards, limit the open view of the plain areas. The main criteria defined for the open space design was not to hide the piggery and the new biogas plant through fences or green barriers, but to balance to mitigate the out of scale that the piggery and the biogas plant create compared to the nearby traditional rural settlements, pursuing mainly the following goals. A reinterpretation of the traditional association of shrubs, hedgerows, and tree patches in local courtyard, and making the relationship, the spatial relationship between the main components of the new plants, service roads, paved area, and residual green spaces, variegated and fluid, try to recreate the scale, the micro size of traditional open spaces. This is another study project for a new anaerobic digestion plant in the countryside of the Tuscany region, province of Arezzo, nearby the existing composting plant and the landfill for municipal waste of the province of Arezzo. The main work was on the definition of interventions and devices able to realize a rebalance of scale between the industrial settlement and the surrounding rural landscape by means of interruptions of an overall full view towards a plant's facility and the creation of diverse scenes, with particular reference to the vision by the car along the adjacent road. In particular, we designed new volumes in expanded metal with varnished color, judging from the volumes designed from a mere engineering perspective in prefabricated panels, fencing curtain of the same material for screening the visibility of the plant facilities that are placed outside the building, groups of trees, creating localized visual filters as a counterpoint to the architectural elements. Turfs with a hard herbaceous species, including tall grasses with a high ornamental value, along the south slope of the embankment that faces the road, in order to hide the lowest level, that of the service roads and areas. These design solutions also are consequential to the intention of establishing a dialogue between the industrial aesthetics and a housing or living aesthetics, by articulating the building facade through figures of a smaller scale, a human scale. Moreover, regarding colors, textures, materials, we introduced warm tones to recall the appearance of the surrounding agricultural landscapes. A more comprehensive and tangible synthesis between the above-mentioned criteria has been achieved in the landscape project for the landfill managed by the company ASA in the metropolitan area of Bologna, in Italy as well. The landfill is for non-hazardous waste derived from industrial activities and consists of two separate landfill sites created in depleted clay pits. The first, this one, having reached full capacity, is now in the post-operational phase, while the second, the large park of the landfill complex, is currently operational. The landscape project was developed as an integral part of a proposal concerning an increase in disposal volume above the ground level of the active landfill. After several studies on territorial peculiarities, including both natural systems and cultural systems, We define as a main, as like the clue aspect of the site identity, the ancient Roman agricultural structure that is still permanent, still legible in the geometry of the agricultural land. Within the landscape project, the signs of the historical agricultural landscape, which are still visible, become a reference for designing the geometric shape of the landfill sector 3, conceived as a landmark, and the insertion of poplar lines and hedgerows that are traditional elements of the rural landscape to which the landfill belongs. Vegetation lines create both ecological corridors for wildlife and pathways for man according to a rhythmic pattern, in order to connect the area with the nearby waterways that have important natural and cultural values but are hardly accessible due to the presence of major mobility infrastructure, the Bologna-Padova highway and another main motorway called Trasversale di Pianura. The project proposes to create an ecological corridor. The presence of the highway bridge and its limited use that allowed the growth of an intrusive and flourishing vegetation on the sides is a good opportunity for a partial ecological defragmentation, supported by the existing elements of water, wetlands, and trenches nearby. This landscape scenario also means recreational opportunities within the existing and planned cycling pathway network. Poplars are planted on new embankments. As the former landfill is covered with natural soil for a thickness that would not be sufficient for trees to grow. These artificial earth volumes and the rows of poplars will create a new and more balanced visual relationship between the plain ground and the future landmark hill that is the current active landfill. In the project, geometrical shapes and organic patches coexist. In addition to the landform of the active landfill, the Centuriatio structure suggested the spatial composition of the following elements: pedestrian paths, ditches for draining rains, hedgerows of native berry shrub species, grasses subject to different mowing regime, including wild flowering meadows, to be mowed only once every 2 years to implement specific habitats for local wildlife. Soft forms draw the shrubby patches, which were shaped reprofiling areas of a previous environmental restoration through extirpations, transplantation on site, and new planting. Existing screening hedgerows of Cupressus leylandi were removed to open the view towards and from the countryside. The work acquired a strong land art physiognomy due to the scale and the iconic forms of the main components. At the same time, the project increases the biologic diversity. Getting back on the field now, the landfill area appears as part of the surrounding countryside, while presenting new cultural and environmental conditions. Concluding, the study, the work, promotes an exploration about comprehensive practices for sustainable soft projects for the built environment in which we live, also with reference to hard areas as waste management sites and industrial sites. We search for design solutions deeply site-specific, anchored to the landscape identity of the place. The traces inherited from the history of anthropic transformations and natural elements or processes are an extraordinary paraphernalia for imaginative open spaces design. Even if the studies were developed in another context, not a Canadian one, I'm confident that some exploration through these projects can be useful also to go further and with a proper declination, keep trying to imagine also hard landscapes as a nice place that can play both an ecological role and a community space for people to live. Thank you.